Good morning. Good morning and welcome. The three of us are going to talk about collaborations between conservation and digital imaging in cultural heritage institutions. My two colleagues are... Oh, I'm sorry. Can everyone hear me okay?
No, a little closer, please.
Closer? How about that? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My colleagues, Sue and Howard, work in museums, and they will be talking about collaborations between digital imaging and conservation in museum settings. I'm the head of digital imaging at the Ohio State University Libraries, so I'll be talking about the same thing, but in the context of large-scale library digitization projects, which is a slightly different take on the issue. So we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, now how about this microphone? Can you hear me okay through this one? Okay, thank you. Before I get started with my presentation, I must thank the Medical Heritage Center at The Ohio State University for providing some funding toward my travel to my very first ever MCN conference. The Barbara Van Brimmer Academic Awards given out by OSU's Medical Heritage Center honor the memory of a librarian who was instrumental in funding this archive of medical history and the history of medical technology. And from here on in, instead of saying The Ohio State University over and over and over again, I'm just going to say OSU, if that's okay. And thank you. Everyone will know I don't mean Oklahoma State University or Oregon State University. It's Ohio. Okay, great. So, as a digital imaging specialist in a large university library, where we do a lot of digital reformatting of text and image-based materials, I'm concerned with how we get that done while still maintaining the original materials and showing respect for them. And I'm also concerned about the continuation of conservation departments in libraries and other cultural heritage institutions, because without them, we really couldn't do the work. In preparing for this, I did some reading, and I found 4 articles and opinion pieces that I thought were particularly relevant to the topic. The first is a 2005 survey published by Marie Kennedy looking at 18 college and university libraries. And she found, I think as she expected to, that the demand for digitization was increasing and increasing. And that increased demand was also putting more of a demand on the conservators who work with the physical objects, but the staffing levels in conservation departments were not increasing concurrently with that. And then the second is the result of a report from the American Institute of Conservators conference in 2011 with conservators from 5 institutions basically providing narrative accounts from their institutions which confirmed the same thing that Kennedy had said in her earlier piece, that the work was increasing for them, but their staffing levels were not. The third is a blog post by Beth Doyle, who's a conservator at Duke University Libraries. And among other things, she talks about the fact that libraries are increasingly distinguishing their collections by talking about their rare objects in their special collections and archives, because the general collections are all pretty even and broadly spread out by projects like Google Books, HathiTrust, Internet Archive, and so on. So the special collections are really what sets one library apart from another now. However, she questions whether those same libraries actually have the resources to support those special collections over time. And then finally, there's a blog post from Jeff Peachy, who's a bookbinder and restorer. And I know the title sounds really depressing, but it's a good read. And in fact, he's got 2 blog posts about book restoration, which are really good. And in this one, he interviews 3 other book conservators who work at large cultural heritage institutions, and they talk in some depth about bookbinding and book repair, and particularly about the fact that in different eras of book production, the bindings were done very differently. And if you're going to work on those books, you have to understand the differences, the essential differences in those binding structures. And the only way you're going to learn that is first through training, and then through lengthy, hands-on experience doing bench work with rare materials. So we have people who can do that now, but if we're going to continue that work, we've got to bring in some new people to start getting that long experience so they'll be ready to do the work when the current generation of conservators retire. So again, I work in digital imaging. I work closely with people who produce the digital projects, put the material online, and think about how it'll be searched and used. So to a large extent, that's my focus, but I'm well aware that if we want to produce text-based digital humanities projects that make our library look good, with things like text mining, optical character recognition, structural markup, text encoding, there's going to be a big impact on how successful those projects are depending on the state of the original materials. For example, this is a student newspaper, OSU student newspaper from 1929. Unfortunately, it wasn't stored very well. The years were not good to it. No matter how good a picture I take of this, you're really not going to see any useful text encoding coming out of it in the state it's in. But once I send it over to the conservators and they work on it with some Japanese heat set tissue, now we have something we can put online. People can read, they can search, they can extract the text, they can do all kinds of interesting things. And I'll talk about this project a bit more later, but first I'll talk a little about our institution, how things are structured. At OSU Libraries, digital imaging happens within the preservation and reformatting department. There are 6 units in the department to handle things like preparing newly acquired materials for shelving, taking large runs of serials and preparing them to go to commercial binderies, and conservation, of course, book and paper conservation. We have the Center for Book Arts, which fosters the study and process of art book making. They run a couple of presses and bring in students, faculty, and outside artists to produce artist books and sell them under the imprint, the Logan Elm Press. And then finally, digital imaging and electronic reserves. We both do different kinds of digital reformatting of library materials. With the exception of electronic reserves, all of the units are under the same roof in the same building, and we're just a few steps away from the conservation unit, which is perfect for the work I do. The digital imaging unit, although it's part of a large university, is actually pretty small. There are 2 full-time employees and 2 part-time student assistants. We work, for the most part, with materials from the library's 7 distinct special collections, each with its own curators and its own collecting missions. We also do some work with materials from the general collection and then from departmental libraries like law and health sciences, and occasionally we help one of the regional campuses with the scanning project. But mostly it's special collections. So we work with a wide variety of formats and objects from different eras, including books, manuscripts, early printed text and image, technical drawings, photographs, composite photos, slides, fine art prints, commercial prints like these early show posters from the university's theatrical collection, and scrapbooks also from the theater collection. And I think it's also because of our proximity to the Center for Book Arts and the Logan Elm Press that we end up photographing a lot of artist books as well, which can take a lot of different forms. And I think it's because we work with so many different formats that as cultural heritage imaging specialists, we are very aware that the physical object itself is just as important as the information transmitted by the object. In fact, the two are often inextricable. So what I'd like to do now is talk about some projects in which the conservators have helped us get items digitized and ready for delivery on the web. This is from a collection the library's Rare Books and Manuscripts department acquired from a collector in France with land tenure documents or deeds from the 15th and 16th centuries. They were handwritten on parchment. As parchment dries out over time, it stiffens, and unfortunately, a lot of these documents had been stored folded up. This could not be unfolded without basically snapping it in two. Couldn't be done. But we needed to digitize it, and we needed, so to say, full page capture of the information on it so that scholars could use it online. So we sent it over to conservation, and actually the first step in the digitization project was humidification and flattening by the library's conservators. Now we have something that's readable online, at least for scholars who can read handwritten Middle French, which of course is the audience for this project. Another project with folded up materials came in the form of foldouts from a series of 19th century geological surveys done in Ohio trying to identify minerals and coal. Digitizing the books wasn't too hard. They're old, fragile books, but we know how to do that. The fold-out maps, though, when I pulled the first one out of the book and took a picture to document its state, you can see that there are these highlights and shadows running all through the page. And not only do they not look very good, they actually impede the visibility of some of the fine text in the lower half of the page. And they even start to run a little through the graphics, which are data-bearing graphics. So again, the first step was to talk to the conservation department, have the piece humidified and flattened. Now it's more readable, and since it's going online, it's also more successful in an online searching environment like Internet Archive, where people can page through it, but they can also search the text. So if you look at the very top, I know it's tiny, but I did a demonstration search for iron ore, and along the bottom of the page, there are these markers showing where all the search results came up, and a lot of them occur in that fine text that previously had this kind of gutters of light and shadow running through it. My point being that conservators dealing with the physical object are key to the success of objects in a digital environment. Another project had to do with obscured information on the back of some football programs from OSU's early days. We digitized programs from 1901 to 1922. There was this brown paper glued on the back of some of the programs from the 1921-22 season. And I think what happened was these were glued into somebody's scrapbook, and then they pulled them out and donated them to the university archives. Okay, so the paper wouldn't come off for years and years. Nobody knew what was on the back. I wanted to know what was on the back because that is prime advertising space. And I know in previous years who had advertised there, but I wanted to know what this was. So again, we consulted with the conservators. They removed the staples from the programs very carefully, soaked the cover to soften up the glue, and then we're able to carefully remove it, and the ad is for Coca-Cola. There were several that were obscured this way, so they treated all of them. That's part of Harry Campbell, our book and paper conservator. They went through, took care of all of them, and so we were able to see they all had the same ad. To me, this was just so interesting to see sort of the convergence and the rise in popularity in American football, along with the increased availability of commercial soft drinks, and seeing the two coming together like this in one piece. Prior to this, the back page ad had always been taken by a local business in Columbus. So as far as I know, this was the first national advertising campaign on our football programs. And I wonder if you went to football programs from other colleges and universities, if you'd see the same ad with the university name changed in some national push by Coca-Cola to spread its product. Okay, so back to the student newspaper called The Lantern, which has been published since 1881 on paper at OSU. Fortunately, most of the issues were not this shattered because we had in excess of 100,000 pages to digitize. When we're dealing with this volume, we look at outsourcing. And of course, that's what we did, but it's not just as easy as shipping the stuff off to the vendor and saying, you deal with everything. Vendors have very specific requirements for handling large-scale projects. And although most of the pages were not torn, we had a different problem with these. What you're looking at here is the curse of 20th century commercial binding. You can see that the pages will not lie flat, and there's all kinds of things going wrong here. The pages have been cut too close to the text, and then they're oversewn with stitching all the way up. That's never good. But even worse in this case is that down in the front, you can't really see it, but if you see the shape of the binding, there's a really stiff piece of cardboard called the spine liner that's holding that shape. So there's really no way to flatten the pages. You can put a heavy piece of glass on them and push. It's still not going to look right. And you could carefully tilt one edge up to flatten the other with an overhead camera and shoot that way. But we're talking about over 100,000 pages, and the vendor was not going to do that. And if you've outsourced any text projects, you know that the minute you start asking the vendor to do that kind of really careful handling, you're losing your bulk discount on the per page price. I mean, the costs go through the ceiling, plus it's going to take years. Okay, so what we could have done was what a lot of places have done, which is completely cut off the binding materials. And then they could be rapidly scanned under a camera, almost like the old microfilming processes. Problem there is all we'd get back is a big stack of pages, unbound. A lot of times they're brittle, and we just didn't want that. As far as we know, these are the only paper copies left of the old student newspapers, and we wanted to keep the binding. So naturally, I went to the conservation department, had another talk with Harry Campbell, and the conservators came up with a solution for us. And in describing the process, I'm going to read directly from something Harry wrote for me, because he's got a better vocabulary for this than I do. Okay. The buckram covering on the spine and just beyond the joints on each board was cut away and removed. All lining materials were removed from the spine by softening the old lining and glue with a paste poultice. Sometimes steam was used to do this, and scraping away the softened materials. Now with the spine somewhat more flexible, the book opened more easily for scanning. After scanning, a traditional reback was done, including new spine linings, new buckram covering material, and mounting the original buckram spine on top of the new cover material. There's a tremendous working vocabulary of binding structures, materials, and processes that work in this description. It's the product of years of experience working with books and book bindings and paper, bringing in traditional hand skills and knowledge that did two things. It allowed us to protect the original materials, very important to us as a cultural heritage institution, and it also made the scanning process more efficient and ultimately cheaper than it would have been. In addition to that, it allows these nice full page captures, since the intellectual content of the object has been captured much more fully than it would have been with the pages, text curving into the bindings. And it allows the images we captured to perform well in an online searching and browsing environment with sophisticated page segmentation and markup, so that individual items can be pulled out and printed, emailed, downloaded, shared on social media, and repurposed and mixed into other historical digital projects. So for me, the work of the Conservation Department is absolutely critical to the success of a digital project. And my concern is that we not get so focused on sort of the digitization and delivery and text mining end of things that we forget that characteristics of the original physical object are equally important to the success of any project. The impact has been that, yes, the Conservation Department's work gets increased, certainly. Originally, the delivery of items to conservation for treatment, either from special collections or from my department, was pretty casual. We would walk things over. Maybe if there were a lot of them, we'd talk about it first, and they would use these conservation worksheets to carefully track all the work done per item. Toward the end of 2012, a couple of things happened. The digitization process was increasing and increasing, and then 2 of the conservation technicians retired within a couple months of each other. So now they didn't have as much staff, and the work was not going down. So after some discussions, the conservators decided to give each of the special collections a certain number of hours each month that they could use, and they could prioritize which collections got got physical treatment. So you see like the summary, monthly summary for the cartoon library and museum at the top here, and then the rare books and manuscripts library below it. Every special collection has this kind of tally per month. So since I was asking them to do so much, I got added to the group of people who gets a certain number of hours every month. So I get about 40 hours, give or take, which I use. And so I'm working between the special collections, the conservation department, and then the digital delivery people who want to prioritize certain projects for production, and I just kind of figure out what comes next. The fact that my work is now so much more blended with the processes of the conservation department is evident in my own record keeping, in which I used to just track the work I did and my staff did. And now I'm actually keeping records of what conservation treatment was done as well. This reflects the fact that my work process as an imaging specialist actually now begins with thinking about conservation treatment. So to wrap up, I think it's clear that I want our conservation departments to continue to be staffed. I consider them crucial to imaging projects. I'd like to see, as a general thing, cultural heritage institutions see the departments and the people who work in them as critical to this new era of library digital projects. The handwork that's done is absolutely essential to this. And of course, along with the experts that we retain, we also need to hire in new people, have them learn the skills that they'll need to be successful in the profession and keep our projects going. Thanks very much.
Did you explore using like a cradle book scanner for the lantern documents? Or?
That's what we do with our in-house scanning when we're dealing with rare books, because obviously we can't cut off even parts of the bindings of rare books and manuscripts. And it's a slower process. I mean, we've got sort of a pace for it. Our scanning vendor who dealt with the oldest copies also used a book cradle. Even so, it was so much easier for her to get through that process with some of the binding loosened up.
What OCR software did you use?
Sometimes we use Adobe Acrobat, and sometimes we use Abby Fine Reader. We tend to prefer Acrobat for anything with a lot of images, especially photographs and anything with gray tones, because Abby, in my experience, sharpens the text very aggressively to get better results from the OCR. If we're doing pages with nothing but text on paper, like annual reports or course bulletins, we'll use Abby. But if it's something where the visual aspect is more important, then we use Adobe. We accept the slightly lower success rate so that the page images look more natural.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sue Grinols. I'm the Director of Photo Services and Imaging at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, and I want to talk to you today about how our department collaborates with our conservation departments. And I have to apologize, I have managed to pick up a cold here. I'm going to give you a brief history of how we've worked with conservation in the past, and then I'm going to touch on 3 of our most recent projects. And I'm not going to get into deep detail of the technology behind these hot topics because I think it's been covered very well here already at the conference, at least with the RTI and photogrammetry. So the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco is made up of two museums. The de Young is in Golden Gate Park, and the Legion of Honor is in Lincoln Park, high up on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. We have about 170,000 artworks in the collection that are comprised of European and American paintings and decorative arts, textiles, ancient objects, ethnographic objects in the form of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas, and the largest print and drawing collection west of the Mississippi. We have 500 employees that administer both museums, and in our department there are three of us: myself, Randy Dodson, who's our head photographer, and Jorge Bachman, who is our imaging technician. And Randy's here at the conference with me this year. Now, it's significant to note for this talk that there are no conservation photographers on staff. Some of the core responsibilities in our department are producing images for our collection management system, and these images make their way onto our website into our searchable online collection. We also produce publication photos for typical museum publications like exhibition catalogs and the like. We have 5 conservation departments at the museum: works on paper, textiles, paintings, objects, and frame conservation. Now, in 1994, we began taking digital photos, but these were in our department, but these were really limited to just documenting our collection for our collection management system. It wasn't until 2006 that we actually went fully digital across the department. Up until that time, 2006, pretty much our only service to the conservators was to occasionally take treatment photos for them. These were typically delivered as 4x5 transparencies, and they were of objects that the conservators couldn't shoot themselves for various reasons. They were too large for their spaces or whatever. And also I just wanted to point out that it was said quite often that our website has a conservation component in that it limits handling of the artwork when scholars who want to study the collection go onto the website first, narrow down what they want to look at, and then come into the museum with a short list of objects to be pulled. Since going fully digital, we've continued to provide the service of photographing treatments for them occasionally. But then as we went down the path of digital photography and delved more deeply into it, changed our workflow, embraced color management, learned of new ways to deliver photos, we eventually found computational imaging. So actually, back in 2008, here at the MCN conference, I met Carla Schroer from Cultural Heritage Imaging, and we began to talk about what it is that they were working on, which of course was this RTI, highlight-based RTI, how to capture this wonderful data. And we began to talk about how actually that might be kind of useful for the conservators. And so since we were in the same city, San Francisco, meaning CHI and the Fine Arts Museums, we decided to partner together, and we did on a CREST grant. And it was our conservation department's the photography department and CHI, and the grant was basically a proof of concept to see if RTI was actually useful for conservators. It was a lot of fun. Turns out it was useful. Very successful grant. Just briefly, RTI is a method where you capture a series of raking light images and then you combine them, and the information you're getting is detailed information about the surface shape, color as well. It's manipulatable on the computer, and it leads to enhanced understanding about the materials. So since partnering with CHI, we've continued to take RTI photos of the collection for the conservators and also the curators. And most recently, we were asked to photograph a Modigliani painting of ours. So this particular painting was done in 1918. It's of Pierre-Edouard Baranowski, who was a contemporary of Modigliani's, a fellow painter. In the 1990s, this painting was de-attributed to the artist. It was deemed to be a copy after Modigliani. In 2011, the donor's family approached the museum and wanted us to re-examine this, to open the case back up. So Elise Effman Clifford, who is our head of paintings conservation, decided to do just that. So the background on the deattribution was based on a whole lot of things, and it was a decision made by a group of experts. Part of their decision was based on an incomplete provenance. They couldn't trace the painting back to the artist. And an atypical substrate. It was painted on hardboard, and most of his stuff was done on canvas. Also, it was due to the exclusion of the painting from the Cerrone Catalogue Raisonné, which was considered the authority. Now, interestingly, there's an underpainting on this artwork, and this radiograph shows it. This next slide shows an overlay showing what the image is, which is it's a face, 2 eyes, a long nose, and a short mouth. This also was considered atypical of Modigliani, but oddly enough, it wasn't used in the deattribution. So Elise asked us to take an RTI image of it so that she could get a better understanding of the underpainting. And here you can see it. This is a screen grab from our RTI session. So Elise went on to do some research, and thanks to the magic of the internet, she was able to discover that actually this underpainting wasn't atypical of Modigliani, which is what the experts had thought it was. They thought that it was atypical. Turns out it wasn't. It turns out that in the beginning of his career, he was actually doing these stylized paintings and sculptures that looked very similar to our underpainting. Here's another example of one of his early works. So this finding, coupled with New Provenance research, she was actually able to trace the painting back to the artist. Discovery that the substrate wasn't atypical after all, and that there were actually some errors in the Cerrone Catalogue Raisonné about materials. And a few other things, much more technical, including our RTI image, led to a new conversation with a group of experts, and so the painting was re-attributed. So now it's, again, thought to be by Modigliani. And this led to Elise giving a talk at the 42nd Annual AIC Conference on the subject. And it also led to our painting being hung back in the galleries. So the other thing that we have done recently with RTI is to test a dome. This dome is under development by a team from UC Santa Cruz. The team is Jing Liu, Brinker Ferguson, and James Davis, and I think Brinker might actually be at this conference this year. So at the time, Brinker was working for us at the Fine Arts Museums, and she asked our department if we would test this out for her and give her feedback, which we were happy to do. It's a system, it's sort of like a cheese dome that they sell. It simplifies the process. You press a button and it fires the lights and the cameras all in sequence. It then sends the images remotely to a computer, which runs a script in concert with RTI Builder software and produces an image. So it really makes it very push button and easy to do. It's simple and portable, and I have to say that sadly Brinker has left the Fine Arts Museum and has moved on to her dream job at the Balboa Park Online Collaborative. So, but she or her team would be, I'm sure, more than happy to talk to you about this if you have any questions about it. Now I just want to briefly go over our foray into photogrammetry. It's another form of computational imaging. The main purpose of it is that you can derive accurate measurements from photographs. It's been around since the days of analog photography. I know that they have used it a lot to produce topographical maps, also the study of fine particle movement like erosion, 3D modeling, and of course Hollywood has adopted it in their special effects departments. There are two types of photogrammetry, aerial and close range. Aerial is where you take a camera up into the airplane and shoot down at the earth. Close range is where the camera is closer to the subject and is what is more relevant to our field. A very simplified version of how it works is you take a series of overlapping photos. You feed these images into the software, which then corrects for lens distortion and constructs a 3D model based on sub-pixel image mapping. And from this model, you can take the actual measurements. So we first heard about this from Chi again, and they have an excellent resource in their website for information on it. They also have a very good workshop that they give in conjunction with the Bureau of Land Management. So in the past year, Randy, our photographer, was photographing this frame for the conservators and decided we thought it would be a great idea to test out this software, so we downloaded a demo copy, took these images, and this is the very first result. It's just a screen grab because I don't have the software on my computer. And the fun thing about this, or the great thing about this, is that we showed it to the frames conservator and she loved it. She just absolutely loved what she could see. And that evening, there happened to be a VIP tour coming through the museum. This was a development event. And it was a behind-the-scenes tour, and so a group of our trustees and their guests made their way into the photo studio. So we scrambled, got a projector, projected this image, and did a little show for them, and got another enthusiastic response. And then the best part is that when we went through the budget talks, because of that, we were able to get approved funding to purchase the software and send Randy to the workshop. So that was awesome. Normally that would not have happened. So fast forward to a few weeks ago. Randy's again shooting a frame. This time it's a 17th century frame from one of our El Greco paintings, and he's captured the data set here. You can see the blue squares are where the camera's positioned. There's a color checker in the top corner and a scale bar in the bottom, and the scale bar is what gives you the accurate measurements. So as I said, I don't have the software in my computer, but this is the basic steps it leads you through when you get to the final rendering. And there are other softwares out there, and I know that other people have discussed them in other seminars during this conference, and there's lots of information about them online. But it seems that the Agisoft software, Photoscan Pro, is the one that she recommends. It's the one that the Bureau of Land Management recommends. And they actually are working in concert with the Agisoft engineers to improve the software. For example, they're producing scale bars that are coded that the software recognizes, which of course makes the rendering go faster, but also makes it more accurate. And I understand that if you let's say you're shooting a freeze, if you put a scale bar in the beginning and a scale bar in the end, the software can detect any errors across your project, so it's a much more accurate way of the results are more accurate, but also you can tell if your project has any errors. So while I don't have that software on my computer, I do have MeshLab, which is open source, and it works on Mac, Windows, iOS, and Android. And so I was able to put this on my computer, and here's the image I just wanted to show you quickly. You can totally manipulate it. You can zoom in. Here's the fun part. You can actually virtually change the lighting, much like an RTI file. And you can also take accurate measurements. And this is from point to point. It is in the XYZ axis, so it's actually three-dimensional point to point. It's not just on the XY plane. So the beauty of this is that you can send a file to a colleague, and they can have this application on their iPad, and they can take a look at this and get these measurements. We could send this image along when an object goes out on loan, or the conservators could share it with their colleagues. It's that sort of thing. People can use it when if they're producing an exhibition and they need to take accurate measurements in order to plan for the exhibition. So we're kind of excited about that. Okay, back to this. So here is the next thing I want to tell you about, which is CamRanger. So our paper conservators had a problem. They wanted to be able to have two people look through a microscope at the same time. And I have to give Randy the credit. He came up with this idea. CamRanger is it's a hardware software package. It controls your DSLR cameras, works with Nikon and Canon, and it creates an ad hoc Wi-Fi network, a local network. It also works on iPad, or iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac. So here you see we've got the camera connected to the microscope, and the CamRanger is controlling the camera via the iPad. This is a close-up of what you're seeing on the iPad. You're seeing the work of art via the microscope, but as run by CamRanger, and you can, of course, using the live view function, and you can, of course, capture the image and then send it off or whatever it is that you want to do with it. This is just a close-up of the actual hardware to show you how simple it is. And these are the instructions that the conservators have posted near the setup to also show you how easy it is to use. Here it is in action. So the conservators use this when they are consulting with colleagues. They use it when people are coming through the lab on a tour. And actually, I think, was it 6 months ago or so, there was a WAC conference, and that's Western Area Association of Conservators. The conference was in San Francisco, and they had behind-the-scene tours at the Legion and came through the paper lab. So now I believe that this system has been picked up by the Library of Congress, and I know that our other conservation departments are beginning to use it as well. We use it in the photo lab to shoot large textiles. Here you can see up on the ceiling is our Nikon camera attached to our Unistrut system, pointing down at the textile. In the old days, when we had to shoot a large textile, the conservators would either pin it to a slant board or sew Velcro to it and hang it vertically. And this method is a lot less stress on the artwork and also a lot less stress on the conservators because they don't have to be so involved in our photo shoots. The downside to it is that if you're using a zoom lens, the zoom lens creeps. That's not so good. And that while the software controls many things, it doesn't control the lens movement. So if you want to take details, you actually have to swap out lenses, which means you have to climb up there. But the textile is on a sheet of plastic, so it's easy enough to pull it out of the way, so it's not such a deal breaker. So I think what I mainly want to reflect on here is that our roles are completely changing within the museum world in terms of our photography department. In a previous seminar, Dan Dennehy mentioned that the young folk in our audiences don't want to see still images anymore. They really only want to see moving images. So their department has begun to adopt videography. Our department has sort of gone the way of computational imaging. And in terms of our relationship with our conservators, we've gone from just basically shooting analog treatment documentation for them occasionally to this providing these computational imaging services. And we've brought new technologies into the museum that have proved useful. If we'd waited around for funding, none of this ever would have happened. So it seems that being creative and agile within our department has led us to success. And also believing in proof of concept and having colleagues who are open to the idea of proof of concept. In the past, when I've tried to talk to folks at the museum about new technologies and whether or not they would be useful to us, I've met resistance because the knee-jerk reaction is we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough time. It means I'm going to have to learn new software. But I think that the entire staff at the museum really is tasked with supporting the museum's mission and programs, part of which is collection care and access and scholarship. And I think that if there are tools out there that will help us, we should really consider them. It doesn't mean we have to commit to them or even spend a lot of time looking at them, but I think that we should look into them. And so our imaging department is taking a more active role, and I think this is sort of the natural progression of the way digital photography is going. I don't think anybody sort of set out to change the role, but it's just happened. It just seems to be the natural way to go, and I think it's a really good direction to go in. And while on some days it feels like we can barely keep up with the normal work that we have to do, I feel that if there's any time in the schedule that we can carve out to apply to this sort of thing, then we should definitely do it. I think it's a lot of fun, it's helping our colleagues, and it's helping our institution. Thanks. Anybody have any questions while we wait for Howard?
So
Yes.
the textile photography, so you're shooting remotely
Yes.
and you are just shooting remotely unwired.
Yes, wirelessly. Yeah, so Randy's sitting in a chair looking at his computer or his iPad or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's great because you can show the people on the ground what it looks like.
But normally sort of live view shooting is done through a USB cable.
Mm-hmm.
And here you're
No cables.
cables.
And is it the file being transmitted via wireless file transmitter after the capture happens? Or is it being...
No, I think he's shooting to a card. I mean, you can probably do either, but yeah.
Oh, that would be a lot slower because you're taking a pretty big raw
Yeah.
and sending that through a local area
Yeah.
to you.
It's an amazing technology because there was even we had to shoot the director, and he doesn't like to stick around for long at all to have his photo taken. And there was a whole marketing team behind him nervous about what the image was going to look like. So Randy was able to just show them the iPad image, and and he wasn't even anywhere near the iPad, and they were all like, "Yeah, perfect," So it's been a pretty good tool. But it's that creativity, I think, that really helps.
Sue, are you archiving all the components of the RTI and photogrammetry as well as the final product?
Yes, we are.
So you're archiving RTIs?
We are.
Because we'll archive the captures knowing we can can always assemble the RTI, but we don't have archiving to find.
Oh, that's a good idea. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, because you can always assemble the RTI.
Yeah, that's true. And as the technology changes, and you might want to use those images for something else.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Good morning, I'm Howard Agriesti from the Cleveland Museum of Art. Hello, everybody. Let's get this machine up and running. Howard Agriesti, Cleveland Museum of Art, but prior to Cleveland, I started at a smaller museum, the John and Mabel Ringling in Sarasota, Florida, many, many years ago. And I'm going to be talking about today about the collaborations with our paintings conservator Dean Yoder for some treatments on a Rembrandt and a Caravaggio, and how we use the imaging to inform and support the attributions of those works. But with Sue talking about RTI, I actually have an interesting anecdote from Sarasota from those early years. I started in '82 in Sarasota, and then in 1990 went to Cleveland. So I was preparing materials for my application for the position in Cleveland. And this slide on screen is some sculpture by an artist in the Sarasota area by the name of Mark Mudge, who I don't know how much you folks know about RTI, but Mark is the principal there. And we had a mutual friend, and they were both New College alumni. And Mark was into bronze casting, sculpture. And Steve asked me if I'd come photograph his friend's work, and I said, sure. And Mark, though, was very, very interested in what I was doing, and I had my prints and application materials for the Cleveland application at the time. And I was showing him what I did was, a lot of that was the work for conservation, which the imaging under different lights, ultraviolet, infrared, raking light, but also specular light, where essentially you're bringing the lights closer to the lens axis and producing glare on the object, and certain surface characteristics can show up depending on where the light is. Mark was fascinated with this and was asking me, where do you place the light? And I said, well, and what type of light? And I said, well, it depends on what light you're using, and where it's placed, you see different things. Then some years ago, I started hearing about RTI and thought, I don't know what that is. And maybe third or fourth time I heard about it, I took a look and was saying, this looks very interesting. And then I noticed Mark's name. And it took a little while later for it to click. I thought, you know, I wonder if that was the seed that planted. But I haven't been able to have a conversation with Mark on this yet. I've talked with Carla via email, but it's kind of interesting how that could be the seed that led to his interest in the area. He's a truly unique mind. But yeah, that's Mark's sculpture from 1989. It's very nice. I'm going to be talking, though, about my collaborations with Dean Yoder here on his treatments of our Rembrandt Portrait of a Woman, and we're now currently working on a Caravaggio. But before that, I want to show the finished work that Dean had undertaken, and then go into showing you how we went about it. Let's see. So let's go. This is actually Dean's presentation to the Midwest Regional Conservation Institute. Midwest Regional Conservation Guild just recently in conservation, where he talked about this treatment and explained how the photographic documentation was used to show the reasons behind undertaking the restoration and how it was done. But it started essentially with a group of he came to me a couple of years before that. Well, here, let me go through the PowerPoint first. Condition mapping, condition cleaning, and in-painting. We had an exhibition on Rembrandt a few years ago, Rembrandt in America, that led to, of course, we would include our Rembrandts in this exhibition, and this led to a re-examination of our Rembrandts. There are, I think, 2 paintings in the collection. And there had been condition issues that had been discussed for years. And rather than treat the painting in time for the exhibition, which would have been a hurry-up treatment, which one does not want to undertake when dealing with a Rembrandt. I'd be very, very careful about it because, quite frankly, the past restoration, had obscured some of the, kind of, in some ways, put the attribution somewhat in question from some quarters. Past restorations often interfere with our ability to understand or fully appreciate a work. Separating original paint from past restorations can be nearly impossible while relying on the naked eye. Conservators use light outside of the normal visible spectrum to aid in this investigation. And Dean mentions down here, images were pre-aligned to cycle through images of different light sources. This is actually the documentation of that treatment post-exhibition, but prior to the exhibition, when he first came to me about this issue, that he wanted to show normal light, raking light, specular, infrared, UV, X-ray. I said, well, I've got an idea for how we can do that. Let's just get the painting and the camera set and cycle through the different lightings while leaving the painting and the camera in exact register, and then the images afterwards will be in perfect register and also done with our high-res cameras, which our conservation department uses 35 millimeter Canon cameras. Actually not 35 millimeter, of course, 35 millimeter sized. Whereas we have higher resolution, higher detailed studio cameras. So that was another part of the component, that we would have high detail from these captures. And that was very useful. And then after the exhibition, when he did begin the restoration, we came up with a system for, over the course of a 6-9 month, perhaps even a year, I don't recall exactly how long the restoration took, to bring the painting back into our studios. Conservation is in a different part of the museum, how to get everything in perfect register for the continuing during treatment photography. But this is a very interesting PowerPoint he put together to illustrate what we had done, with the electromagnetic spectrum over here showing the visible light scale, and then where the ultraviolet and the infrared wavelengths lie. So this was our visible light, obviously. Raking, showing the surface. And at this magnification, you can't really see that much of the raking light effect. Then the infrared, the UV, the X-ray. Of course, the X-ray was done separately, and we aligned that.
And that was UV autofluorescence, that's UV.
Yes, UV fluorescence, right. It's visible photography of the subject is excited. It's bathed in ultraviolet light, which excites visible fluorescence in the visible range. You're not actually photographing ultraviolet wavelengths. We do have. We did get the Fuji UV IR camera some years ago, which does actually photograph in the UV range and then in the near infrared. Our conservation studios, they have one of these high bandwidth infrared cameras, imaging cameras that are in the, gosh, I don't know, $60,000 range. They have these tiny, tiny chip imagers, but they see to a much higher wavelength than a standard digital infrared camera. Standard digital infrared cameras essentially see in the same range that infrared film had seen, 1100, 1200 nanometers. I'm not, maybe Dale knows a little, somewhere in that range, but then these higher-end imagers see in the 1,500 to 1,700 nanometer range, and even higher, some of them, which does allow you to see further under the surface. But yeah, the UV was, that is in the visible range. Then the X-ray. But then you can see how they were all done up in alignment. And
What are the holes in the back of the panel? You see in the X-ray they get really, really thin, and then you see them there.
let's see here. Oh, up at the top. I think those are wax seals.
I mean, they're registering, very low density in the X-ray, so I just thought there were holes in the panel.
You know, it's funny, they're wax seals. Why would the X-ray not see through that? Lead-based wax? It would have to be. But then to support the treatment, the reasons behind the treatment, and to thoroughly document what was being done, these high-res images were very helpful because they were able to take them in and have at very high resolution create these different condition mappings. Recent retouchings outlined in yellow to be used as an overlay in normal light. So they took the UV image and made these mappings of all these areas of recent retouchings from the UV. And there they are in the visible light portion. As comment, zinc white used in recent retouching paint has become lighter with age. These subtle light patches of discolored retouching have a subtle but profound visual impact. You'll see at the end of this sequence what was really uncovered about this piece and how the previous retouching had obscured some of its authenticity. It shows the extent of the zinc white prior retouchings. And the IR shows the abraded areas underneath. And areas of the most significant abrasion are mapped with a red dotted line. So there they are used in these various lightings. Retouching map overlaid with abrasion map. They can see where the abrasions were previously. And
Do they think these were abrasions from overcleaning? Aren't the face?
I would think. I'm not clear on that point, Dale. But I would assume that would be the case. Where else would the abrasions have come from? But Dean could not join me for the conference. I was hoping he would be able to come. And then there's the X-ray. And Photoshop, he decided to do this, to do a colorized X-ray image. And then this exercise was designed to demonstrate how the actual condition and restorative interventions can have a profound effect on our perception of an artwork. I think he just included this slide because he wanted to record all the hard work that was done on creating these mappings. But it makes for a pretty fantastic slide. But this was the iPad Interactive, which I'll show in a little bit here, that was done for the exhibition. This was put together by a firm by the name of Earprint. Jason Rainier is a principal, and he's actually in attendance here today. This was part of the exhibition that was part of the public component where the public could come in and using iPads could look through the different lightings, and it's pretty amazing. We'll take a look at that in a few minutes. And here we were setting up for the aligned photographic documentation. There's CMA's Rembrandt from 1635, Houston's, which is interesting since we're here in Texas. The cleaning sequence before one. But Dean found this very useful to be able to have these images all perfectly aligned and see the progression of the treatment. A UV photo before treatment, the UV after. Natural light photo before, natural light after. The two different pieces. And then this is a little more interesting here. At the end of this sequence, you can really see what happened with this painting. And these were taken over the course of many months, and the painting was brought back to the studio continually over that time period, and we were able to get it right back in perfect register. In painting sequence. Final. Now, I think the change will be here in just a minute. I think that's the after UV. That's the transition. Look at the left eye, right from your view, as to the difference in the appearance of the subject. This past restoration kind of put the entire attribution of this in question. Nobody was seriously questioning it, but it was enough that that's a Rembrandt.
Wow.
So, let's see. But let me go through real quick how we went about this documentation. This is Dean and I in the studio. Actually, another one of my photographers, David Britchford, did the photography. But we set up in the back of the studio space a station with a table and basically recorded every particular that we could think of to make certain that we could get everything back in alignment. And we used these little targets on the corners. This specific, this custom frame holder was made, and this series of photos really just illustrates all the details that we went into. It's funny, these little scales here we actually had gotten from our county coroner's office 15, 20 years ago on a visit to their photographic studios many years ago, and they're great for making alignment targets. But David, who did the photography, he made a point of documenting everything, the exact distances, the heights, the angle of the lights, photographic notes here, shots from different angles to be certain that everything would be back in its exact place so that the photographs could be perfectly aligned. Simple shots like this, light stand location, 36-degree angle, height here, height there, different views. I mean, specifically to this bolt, UV head. These heads are great, by the way. This is CNR lighting. I see some photographers in the room, so I'm sure some of you folks know about these, but these allow us to use strobe for UV, which is kind of nice.
Does CNR make that?
They do. And, oh, it's Braun, pardon me, yes. Yes, and Braun is now handled by Hasselblad. It was CNR Braun, and now it's Hasselblad Braun. The filtration. I'm actually using a filter for this, technical note for the photographers. It's an old infrared cutoff filter for slide duping that was bought in 1982 or something. And it actually performed better than the name is escaping me at the moment, the correct standard filter for cutting off the infrared wavelengths from it contaminating the color. Here's an example of David's notes, text document. There's probably another 3 or 4 pages down below. He wanted to be sure he remembered every single detail in order to get these back into alignment. And then in the software for the cameras we were using, we were able to get everything set and then get the new image up on screen and then get an overlay of one of the previous images and then get it fine-tuned with those target corners to get it perfectly aligned. This is the this is actually a different I'm going to go ahead and go into these at this point. This is a different, this is an exhibition on the Caravaggio restoration, the one that's going on right now. We decided to engage the public by having this restoration take place as an exhibition in a public gallery. And people were fascinated. This is a microscope table that was constructed for the exhibition that was, I don't know how heavy, it was tons, a couple of tons. They wanted to make sure there were absolutely no vibrations. Oh, there's Dean at work in the gallery talking with visitors, donors. But this was a great exhibition, and the imaging helped support that. And it was one of the most attended exhibitions in recent times. This is some notes of mine on the photography for this piece. This was the natural lighting that I used for this large painting. This blurry photograph shows the polarized light. These are, this is the lighting, these are polarized filters over the lights. There's a little bit better, you can see the polarized filters over the lights. Raking lighting. But again, snapshot notes of every detail to make certain that we're not forgetting anything when we go in for the reshoot. This was the infrared photography done in the conservation studios, which I assisted with, helping them get the painting line. Most paintings are not perfectly flat. This photography, these high-end cameras have these tiny imagers that produce, they're like 640 pixels on the long side, instead of the many megapixel cameras we're all used to. So to get a high-quality infrared image, you have to take many, many photographs and put them all together. And most paintings are not, and to do that, you have the camera and the light stationary, preferably move the painting around in front of the camera. And if the painting is warped, it's, certain areas are going to be further or closer. So we came up with an average that worked well for this by checking on there. There's the camera used, the Xenix camera. Oh, this is funny. I'll go ahead and go into this. Helen and I took a vacation to Portland. To Portland, Oregon this summer. Another thing I had done with, that I've helped the conservation studio with, is one of our most recent Canons. We had converted to infrared, and it's fantastic. It sees at a lower spectral wavelength than the high-end camera that you had just seen. So it doesn't see as far under the paint surface. But for wherever it works, whatever you can see with it, it's so much sharper than that $60,000 camera. And this is an older Canon. It was the 22 megapixel model. But I'll go ahead and continue with this because I took it on this trip to learn to work with the camera because I just had this modification done. This is a scene shot in daylight at the little bed and breakfast we were at looking over the Willamette Valley. But here's the same view done in infrared, and it kind of shows how infrared can see through haze. That's why I want to kind of include that, but also it was a fun trip.
Okay, thanks, Howard.